Two of the very best UFC fighters on the planet will collide when Makhachev and Volkanovski. Makhachev will defend the lightweight championship, while Volkanovski will defend his standing as #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the UFC. Makhachev and Khabib Nurmagomedov officially laid out the challenge to Volkanovski in the aftermath of UFC 280, an opportunity Volkanovski had lobbied for months. Volkanovski's detour to lightweight necessitates a new champion at 145 pounds. Will compete to crown the interim featherweight champion in the co-main event. Rodriguez is a highlight reel striker coming off a TKO via injury against Brian Ortega. Emmett has quietly worked himself into contention with big power and uncanny toughness, most recently defeating Calvin Kattar. Below is the complete fight card for UFC 284 along with the latest odds from Caesars Sportsbook. Check back all week long for the latest news, features and other content around this massive event. Islam Makhachev is since UFC 280, the new champion of the lightweight category of the UFC. Russian outclassed Charles Oliveira and offered himself the belt of the division. Immediately after the encounter, Alexander Volkanovski entered the octagon and asked to face the new champion. A request that Makhachev did not refuse. Daniel Cormier, the two men had said they agreed to face each other soon. UFC 284. The two men have been looking for each other on social media for a few weeks. On Twitter, the UFC has decided to formalize the meeting. Islam Makhachev and Alexander Volkanovski will face off for the lightweight belt at UFC 284. The event will be held in Perth, Australia, on February 11th. A duel at the top. The stakes of this duel are numerous. Indeed, if one challenges his belt, the other challenges his status as #1 in all categories in the UFC. The meeting promises to be intense between two of the strongest men in the American organization. Which of the two athletes do you think will win on February 11th? Sean O'Malley said he had a strange feeling about the future fight between Alexander Volkanovski and Islam Makhachev. Next month at UFC 284, Alex Volkanovski will face Islam Makhachev. For many, the child of Makhachev has a great chance of establishing himself as the #1 pound-for-pound in the UFC. Alexander Volkanovski, meanwhile, could achieve a phenomenal feat by beating Khabib's protégé at lightweight. If he succeeded, the Australian would become a legendary double champion. A big challenge. #1 bantamweight contender Sean O'Malley commented on the clash, "It's going to be tough to beat Islam Makhachev. I have a strange feeling that to be a much bigger challenge than everyone thinks. Can it potentially do the job against Islam? If Alex can't, I don't know who can." Via News. Inevitably, the great is considered the great outsider. According to many observers, the featherweight champion is too small and will be outclassed in grappling by the king of the lightweights. See you on February 12th for a duel of champions, which is akin to a modern-day David against Goliath. Do you think Alexander Volkanovski has a chance to beat Islam Makhachev? Alexander Volkanovski said his team is close to setting up a bout against Islam Makhachev, per Mark Raimondi of ESPN. The Battle of UFC Champions would take place at UFC 284 on February 12, Perth, Australia. "We're obviously pushing for it," Volkanovski said. "Everyone wants it. We're going to make it happen." Volkanovski has emerged as the top pound-for-pound fighter in the latest UFC rankings after successfully defending his featherweight title against Max Holloway, his third win against the former champ. The Australian is now 25 and is undefeated since joining UFC in 2016. The next challenge for him is moving up in weight class, trying to join Conor McGregor as the only person to hold the lightweight and featherweight titles at the same time. Makhachev is rated the #3 pound-for-pound fighter behind Volkanovski and Israel Adesanya, but his size and experience could make him a tough opponent in a potential bout. The 31-year-old earned the UFC lightweight title in October with a win over Charles Oliveira by submission. He is 23-1 in MMA, with his only loss coming in 2015. Volkanovski believes the fight will provide an opportunity to further prove himself. It's going to be like a David and Goliath, because everyone thinks he's the strongest man on the planet, best grappling anyone has ever seen, Volkanovski said. The way they're talking about him, it's just going to look incredible when I get the job done. Dustin Poirier expects size to play a factor in the Islam Makhachev vs Alexander Volkanovski super fight. Lightweight champion Makhachev, 23-1 MMA, 12-1 UFC, defends his title against featherweight champion Volkanovski, 25-1 MMA, 12-0 UFC, in the UFC 284 main event February 11 at RAC Arena in Perth, Australia. Although Volkanovski has competed all the way up to 170 pounds early in his career, he has found a home at featherweight, where he has ruled the division in dominant fashion. Makhachev has outgrappled all his opposition in his OCTAGON wins, and Poirier thinks Volkanovski could have a tough time dealing with his strength. I think Volkanovski's going to be a little undersized for 155 pounds, but he can still win it, he could still get it done, Poirier said in an interview with Bro Bible. He's beat some great 145ers. He beat Max Holloway a few times. We'll see. But I think he's just going to be a little undersized compared to Islam. Islam's big, solid, strong. Former interim lightweight champ Poirier, 29-7 MMA, 21-6 UFC, is on the cusp of another title shot after he submitted Michael Chandler at UFC 281. The Diamond is looking for an opponent who excites him for his next fight, but if the UFC offered him a backup role for Makhachev vs Volkanovski, he'd think about it. I would never say never, but they haven't reached out yet, Poirier said. Alexander Volkanovski has demanded Khabib Nurmagomedov's absence never be mentioned after he claims champ status at UFC 284, saying, "It better not be used as an excuse once this is all done." While still 3 weeks away from his hyped UFC 284 headliner against Islam Makhachev, Volkanovski and the Russian superstar squared